What if I told you a Soulslike could explain its respawn mechanic using Hindu mythology? Well, Unleash the Avatar might be doing exactly that. On the surface, it looks like just another RPG inspired by Indian mythology. But after watching the trailers over and over again, I started noticing things. Hidden mythological references, characters with deeper meanings, clues about the story, and a theory that completely changed how I look at this game. So today we're breaking down the story, the gameplay, the mechanics, the combat, the graphics, and above all, my concerns for the game. And whether Unleash the Avatar has what it takes to become one of the most ambitious games ever made by an independent studio in India. Let's begin. Before we talk about the gameplay, I want to talk about what I think is the most interesting part of the trailer. The story. Because after watching it several times, I've realized AOS Games has hidden few clues here and there within the gameplay. The trailer opens by mentioning and showing the Nistari Maranajay Rakshas. Now, the important word here is Rakshasa. In Indian mythology, Rakshasas aren't just monsters. Some are warriors, some are kings, and some are scholars. Even Ramana himself is a Rakshas. So when the gameplay specifically introduces this character as a Rakshasa, it immediately tells us that isn't just another enemy that we'll forget in 5 minutes. This character is probably important to the story. Then we hear another name over and over again. Yamaloka. Now here's the thing I think many people misunderstood. Yamaloka isn't simply hell. It's a realm between earth and hell. And sitting right there on that throne is Yamadharmaraja, the god of death, and most importantly, the god of justice. According to Hindu tradition, souls arrive in Yamaloka to be judged based on their karma, which immediately changes how we should look at the story. Because if Yamaloka is involved, maybe this isn't just another good versus bad story. Maybe the balance between life and death itself is being disturbed. Then we meet Kinkara. And this is one of my favorite details, because Kinkara isn't actually the name of a famous villain. It's a title. It literally means servant. Many traditions describe Kinkaras as attendants who carry out Yama's commands. Now listen carefully to his dialogue.
I will drag you to Lord Yama by your tongue.
He doesn't say, I'm going to kill you. Instead, he says he'll drag Vikram to Yamadharmaraja, which makes me think Kinkara isn't trying to execute Vikram, he's trying to capture him and bring him before Yama. And that raises an even bigger question. Why? Has Vikram broken some divine law? Or is Yama trying to judge him before allowing him to continue his journey? Before we move on, there's one more interesting detail. In an interview, the developers mentioned that game is loosely inspired by Ramayana. Now notice the words, loosely inspired. This isn't a video game adaptation of Ramayana. In fact, the more I watch the trailer, the more I realize it's telling its own story while borrowing themes and ideas from Indian mythology. And that's probably the better approach, because it gives the developers the freedom to surprise while being respectful towards a great epic like Ramayana. Which brings us to Bhumi, clearly the emotional heart of the story. She is kidnapped, and everything Vikram does after that seems to revolve around finding her. But then Vikram says something that immediately stood out for me.
I have died 1,000 deaths to get to you, Bhumi.
I will die 1,000 deaths to reach you. Now yes, it's a beautiful promise, but I think the developers may have hidden a clever nod to the Souls-like genre. Because in Souls games, death isn't a failure. Death is progression. You learn, you adapt, you try again. If that's intentional, then every time we die while playing, Vikram is literally fulfilling that promise. He will die 1,000 deaths if that's what it takes to reach Bhumi. Now here is where my theories begin. I think this is how the opening of the game plays out. Vikram lives a peaceful life, then suddenly the barrier between Earth and Yamaloka begins to collapse. Bhumi is kidnapped, Vikram chases after her, he reaches the first major boss and loses. Maybe even dies. And that's where everything changes. Because after that point, we start saying something that wasn't there before. The Garuda inspired shoulder ornament. My theory is that this isn't just another armor. It's the moment Vikram receives his divine blessing and becomes the avatar. Again, that's just my theory. But it would explain why the game is called Unleash the Avatar instead of simply Defeat the Demons. Finally, let's talk about the biggest mystery, Yama himself. The trailer ends by showing Yama seated upon his throne inside Yamaloka. The room is filled with skulls. Massive guardian statues stand watch. And above the throne is what appears to be a Kritimukha, a guardian face commonly carved above the entrance of Indian temples. It's an incredible visual, and here is the question everyone is asking. Is Yama the final boss? Honestly, I don't think that's the answer. Yama isn't traditionally portrayed as villain. He is the god of justice, the guardian of the natural order, the one responsible for ensuring every soul reaches its rightful destination. Which leads me to my biggest theory. What if Yama isn't chasing Vikram because he wants Bhumi, but because Vikram keeps breaking the laws of life and death? Think about it. Every time we die in a Soulslike, we come back. That's completely normal for us as players, but inside the game's world, that shouldn't be possible. Imagine you're Yamadharma Raja. Your entire purpose is to maintain balance between life and death, and then suddenly one mortal dies, comes back, dies again, comes back again, over and over. To us, it's just a gameplay mechanic, but to Yama, it could be a crime against the very laws he is sworn to protect. And suddenly, everything starts making sense. Kinkara isn't trying to kill Vikram, he's trying to capture him, bring him before Yama, judge him. Not because Vikram is evil, but because he is becoming something that shouldn't exist. A man who refuses to stay dead. If that's actually where the EOS Games is taking the story, then I absolutely love it. Because it just doesn't borrow from Hindu mythology, it uses Hindu mythology to explain one of the most iconic mechanics in Souls-like games. And if our theories are even remotely correct, this isn't just a story about saving Bhumi. It's a story about challenging death itself, which perfectly fits Souls-like genre. Now, let's talk about something I think Unleash the Avatar gets surprisingly right. Its identity. Because good graphics aren't just about realistic textures. They're about creating a world that people will remember. And after watching both gameplay trailers, I don't think EOS Games is trying to build another generic fantasy world. They're trying to build an Indian one. The first thing that stood out to me was the environment. Instead of medieval castles, European villages or Gothic cathedrals, we are exploring ancient Indian temples, rock-cut shrines, massive stone gateways, and landscapes that feel inspired by places like Hampi and the Vijayanagara Empire. Now, I'm not saying these locations are direct recreations, but the inspiration is definitely there. And honestly, I love that, because India has thousands of years of architectural history that games rarely explore. Then there is another detail that I think many people missed. The game doesn't stop at mythology. It celebrates Indian culture as well. In one scene, we see a performer wearing a costume that's heavily inspired by Yakshagana, with elements that also resemble Kathakali. That might seem like a small detail, but it tells me that the developers aren't just borrowing gods and demons, they're borrowing India's performing arts, its traditions, and its cultural identity. That makes the world feel much more authentic. The same philosophy carries over to the weapons. Instead of filling the game with oversized fantasy swords, EOS Games has chosen weapons that immediately feel rooted in Indian history. We've already seen the chakra become one of the core gameplay mechanics. Kinkara fights using a gada, a weapon famously associated with legendary warriors like Bhima and Hanuma. Even Vikram's sword feels inspired by Indian designs rather than European longswords. It's these little decisions that give the game its own personality before you even press a button. You can already tell that it isn't trying to imitate Western fantasy. Now let's talk about graphics themselves. Visually, I think the second gameplay trailer is a noticeable improvement over the first. The lighting feels more natural, the environment has more depth, the colors are richer, and the game does a much better job of creating atmosphere. That said, I also want to keep the expectations realistic. This isn't a 500 crore blockbuster. This isn't Rockstar Games production. This is an ambitious indie game being developed by a relatively small team. So when I look at these visuals, I'm not comparing them to GTA 6, Dark Souls, Elden Ring, Sekiro, or even Black Myth Wukong. I'm comparing them to what an independent Indian studio is realistically capable of achieving. And from that perspective, I think they've done a pretty impressive job. With that being said, there are still areas that need polish. Some facial animations can improve, a few combat animations still look stiff, and I think environmental destruction could be expanded. But those are the kinds of improvements you'd expect during development. The important part is that the game's artistic direction already feels confident. It knows what it wants to be, and honestly, that's much harder to achieve than simply pushing more polygons. Now let's answer one question that almost everybody has been asking. What platforms is Unleash the Avatar coming to? As of now, the game is officially confirmed for PC via Steam. You can already wishlist it on Steam through the official website. Now I know what many of you are thinking. What about PlayStation or Xbox? At the moment, EOS Games hasn't officially announced any console versions. However, the game developers have said that they're exploring consoles after the PC release. So PlayStation and Xbox haven't been ruled out, they're just not confirmed yet. After everything I've said, you might think I'm completely sold on this game. I'm not. In fact, I still have quite a few concerns, and I'm bringing them up because I genuinely want this project to succeed. Let's start with the biggest one, enemy variety. We've seen several bosses, and honestly, they all look fantastic. But what about the enemies in between? One of the biggest mistakes a Soulslike can make is repeating the same 5 enemies for 20 hours. I'm hoping every region introduces its own unique creatures, its own mythology, and its own combat challenges. Because India has centuries of folklore to draw from. Rakshasas, Yakshas, Pisachas, Vetalas, Nagas, Asuras. There's so much material available, I really hope the developers take advantage of it. Tone. We've already talked about the tone. Some of the over-the-top animations are ruining the immersions within the game. I'm not saying they shouldn't be there, but they should be toned down, just to make sure that the game doesn't deviate from its serious tone. So after everything we've seen, what do I actually think about Unleash the Avatar? I think it's one of the most ambitious games ever attempted by an independent Indian studio. Not because it's trying to compete with GTA 6 or God of War or Black Myth Wukong, but because it's trying to build something with its own identity. Souls-like inspired by Indian mythology, Indian history, Indian architecture, Indian performing arts, and Indian weaponry. That's something we simply haven't seen at this scale before. Will it be perfect? Probably not. There are still animations that need polishing, combat can become even more impactful, performance remains a big question mark, and there are still plenty of things we don't know. But that's okay, because this isn't the finished game. What matters is that every trailer has shown improvement. The developers appear to be listening to the feedback, and that's one of the most encouraging signs you can ask for. But now, I want to hear from you. What's your biggest theory about the story? Who do you think the real villain is? Is Yama actually the antagonist? Or is he simply trying to protect the natural order? Let me know your theories in the comments. I'd genuinely love to read them. If you've enjoyed this breakdown and want me to cover future updates, developer interviews, hidden details, and gameplay reveals, consider subscribing. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.